Operation Sindoor, 3 months later, what is your assessment?
This is a revival of offensive air power.
His airfields have been shattered, his air bases have been hit.
See, he is certainly worried. They have had significant losses of platforms as well.
What's going on through his mind right now?
We have heard that. He will most certainly want to come and hurt the Indian Air Force and our bases.
So, a strategic partnership with the Russian Federation, the United States.
The Indian Air Force has always been a victim of geopolitics.
So, F-35 is not on the radar for you.
There's a reason why we didn't go to the US. We have never had a US fighter.
This will be the smallest Indian Air Force. How worried are you?
This has been staring us in the face for almost decade and almost 2 decades.
29 squadrons. Can you fight a two-front war?
We have to get real with it.
Hello and welcome to the Sandeep Unnithan Show, your weekly dose of defense, geopolitics, and much, much more. I have with me on my show today Air Marshal Diptendu Choudhury, air warrior, scholar, and former commandant of the National Defense University. Air Marshal Choudhury, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Sandeep. It's a pleasure to be back on air with you.
Pleasure's all mine, Air Marshal Choudhury. Operation Sindoor, 3 months later. What is your assessment? What did the Indian military do in 2025 that it had never done before?
I think the most defining change from the past is a offensive approach from a military. We've always been defense-oriented, hold the line kind of mindset in the past. But the first time I've seen that it's an offensive approach where in peacetime you've gone inside an enemy adversarial territory and to send a political message across. And we did that in the past in Balakot, but that was technically the first time.
Right.
But to do it in the kind of mass and scale is something which is defining, and I think something which you've never done. And most importantly, I think what has brought it back, because for a long time, offensive air power had sort of receded from the memory, national memory, because we really used offensive air power very seriously across the line in 71.
Right.
And that's, decades and more than half a century ago.
Yes.
So I always, talk about it when I said that probably it's gone off the mind of a strategic establishment and security establishment.
Right. We forgot the lessons of 1971.
Absolutely. What offensive air power could really, do in terms of, shaping behavior or coercing or, deterrence, compliance, whatever, air powers use. I think that has come back. I keep saying that this is people said, that, okay, this is the first time we've realized offensive air power. I said, no, this is a revival of offensive air power of sorts.
Yeah, and, you wouldn't be surprised because this very fine book that you put together with Air Marshal Arjun Subramaniam, that's Force in Statecraft. It's absolutely one of the best collection of essays that I've ever read. And this, I'm going to, pull out the chapter which you wrote on the enduring relevance of offensive air power. I'm just reading out those lines where you've said that offensive air power will unarguably emerge as a decisive instrument that can precipitate such outcomes because of its inherent characteristics of speed, reach, flexibility, and precision. And of course, you talk about while it may not significantly alter adversary state behavior, the willingness to use air power will possibly continue to serve as a restraining factor in state-sponsored sub-conventional actions. You literally saw what was going to happen in 2025 when you wrote this essay in 2022.
Absolutely. Actually, Sandeep, by the time book came out, it was about 22, but we were working on it for a little time. And this is something, it goes back to my old argument, that we were, at some point, air power had sort of receded from the memory.
Offensive air power
had receded from the memory.
Right.
And, the Air Force only got associated with air defense for some time. But I keep saying this, air power has always been, and not just me, that's been the raison d'etre of air power, is offensive air power. Right. The ability to strike the enemy. And from World War II onwards, they suddenly realized that air power could go deep into adversarial spaces and create strategic outcomes.
Right.
This is one lesson, because since I think possibly Kargil. Even Kargil, we operated within our own,
You couldn't cross the
you couldn't
LOC.
cross the LOC.
Right.
And so the effects of offensive air power, what it could to do to an adversary outside, had actually gone out of our minds.
Right.
And from the Air Force, and we've been always talking about it for the longest time. And I'm glad, I think this came back. It's been happening in the West all over.
Right.
But somehow we were so caught up in our, terrorist challenges on our Western front and the adversary on the North.
Right.
So our approach was entirely different. We sort of fell back into a defensive space.
So it's an interesting observation, Marshal Choudhury. And do you believe this has to do with the political class awakening to air power? Because you know what happened in 1962. You've documented it in your writings as well, where the political establishment was afraid to use offensive air power against the Chinese. In 65, we started seeing the, reassessment of air power. And of course, 71, as you described, 71 and 99. Do you think it has to do with how the politicians see the use of the Air Force?
That's a very interesting point you make, Sandeep, and it has a lot of merit in it, in the sense that, because that's how the whole thing came up. Because from 47 onwards, air power has been restrained, constrained.
Right. What happened in 47?
47, what happened was, that's when our military leadership was still the Brits.
Right, of course.
And our Indian leadership. Both sides.
Yeah. And
it had just become, India and Pakistan.
Right.
And both were, at that point in time, both were Commonwealth, for the Brits.
Right.
That was the two countries who were joining the Commonwealth.
Yes.
So they did not want this war to escalate.
Right.
So there was constraints on both sides to hold it down and play it down. So we had about 6 squadrons, but we committed only 3.
Right. Hurricanes, I think, primarily.
We had tempests, Spitfires and Hurricanes.
Right.
We did a fair amount of operations there.
Right.
But what is very interesting is that in that war itself, I think it was, if I remember, Sardar Patel, or I'm not too sure who.
Right.
At this point, I forget. He had suggested that we target the military, the invaders, on the borders.
Right.
On the borders. Right. And, create something called a cordon sanitaire.
Right.
But that was turned down.
Right.
So air power use was constrained.
Right.
62, we know what happened.
John Kenneth Galbraith.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's when this whole thing of fear of city bombing of the cities brought in this mindset that use of air power would be escalatory.
And would invite retaliation.
And I would argue that like in 1962, you're already fighting with the nation.
Yeah.
You want to throw everything you have in your kitty into the fight, to win that fight.
Right.
You wouldn't want to go into that fight with one arm tied behind your back.
Right.
So that is the whole thing. 65 also, it prevailed. There's a very interesting part in the book of the icon on the Marshal of the Air Force. That time he was the chief, when he went and spoke to the Prime Minister, Lal Bahadur Shastri at that time. And the Prime Minister showed this concern that, do you think they will bomb our cities?
Right.
So even in 65, I would say that fear was there in the minds, so that carried through.
Right.
71 was the only time we really was an unfettered use of air power.
But the Western theatre operations have not got the kind of importance. Everyone looks at the East because you literally bottled up the Pakistan forces there. But what happened on the West?
So, very interestingly, we had a very small operating window because we knew this intervention will attract a lot of international attention.
Right.
And so there was a clear strategy, military strategy, that on the Western front, we will hold them off.
Right.
And concentrate all our offensive efforts on the Eastern front.
Right.
And if necessary, some limited offensive on the West, if needed. Pakistani strategy was something entirely different, because in the larger picture, they believed that the defense of East Pakistan lay in the West.
Of course.
So they said anything happens in the East, we will do a counter strike from the West.
Right.
And because that's when the Indian armed forces would be locked in and the attention would be on the East, is the time they would sort of do a pincer from the West. And but that didn't really come through. And air power had a huge role in it, because it stopped 3 serious armored thrusts.
Right.
And so my point is, the Western front got overshadowed because all the attention and the oxygen got sucked into the Eastern Front, and we won there.
Yeah, of course. But you have very successful, interventions, like you mentioned. You stopped the armored thrust at Longewala.
Absolutely.
Shattered the entire in Cham.
Absolutely.
All those battles.
Absolutely.
But we kind of forgot that. Is it because you're saying that we didn't use air power for so long since Kargil in 1990?
I don't think it's that, Sandeep. It's just that, we Indians, very frankly, let's be honest about it, the research and study in depth is not the best.
It is.
And all the focus and study and the writing and the articulation and the narratives were all on the Eastern Front, where we won a victory.
And the West, we didn't study
enough. We didn't study enough. And I keep arguing, I said the Western Front needs the most study, because that is where it just proved through again in Sindur. That, you can't take your eyes off the West.
Yes.
And that an adversary there, which has, historically we have fought so many wars and conflicts with them. For practically, if you look at
But get into your adversary's mind, Marshal Choudhury, and, tell us, Op Sindur, what's your adversary thinking about now? He may have pulled off initial surprises. Some aircraft we believe have been lost. There have been, the CDS has admitted to that. But his airfields have been shattered, his air bases have been hit, his radars have been holed. What's going on through his mind right now? And some of those airfields have not been operationalized even 3 months later. Rahim Yar Khan and all, for instance. You've struck in less than half an hour, using the Air Force at all of these things. How scared would your adversary be right now? And what's he planning next?
See, he is certainly worried, because in this time around, the PAF essentially has been an Air Force which has always been air combat focused. Their whole raison d'etre was, frankly, the only enemy the Pakistani Air Force has is the Indian Air Force, not even the Indian military.
Right. Oh, so you mean they focus on air-to-air combat rather than air-to-ground?
Absolutely. Historically, you see the support which the PAF has done for the army is way, way negligible compared to what we have done for our, towards joint operations.
Close air support,
interdiction missions and things like that. So they love a little bit of myth building, so they have created a narrative that they are the most, the most combat kills possibly in, South, in Asia, and, the most defining Air Force.
Yes.
And do remember, this was also, built up by the Western media, because the West was always the US and the UK are the two countries who had enormous engagement with the PAF for the longest period of time, and those ties still bind. So the kind of, I think Pushpinder Singh has written, this is the kind of media handling and the narrative building which the Pakistanis have been doing in the past for the Pakistani Air Force. Indian Air Force, we never had time for it, frankly. So they have built up a narrative. But that Air Force, if you really look at it, an Air Force should be there to serve the nation's larger interest, political outcomes, military objectives, strategic objectives, national interests. So it's an instrument of force. So if you see, we have always prevailed upon them, because our offensive, look at the amount of targeting offensive air power usage which we have done in both fronts, in all the wars. Way more than the Pakistani Air Force.
Especially on the ground.
On the ground. So that we have heard them in 65, we have heard them enormously in 71, and as well as Sindur. So today I look back, because in between about 5-7 years back, I think they switched to this strategy of offensive defense, which became sort of the fashion with the Chinese also did. So they started building their offensive capabilities, but that has sort of its limits have been shown in Sindur. So their offensive capability was limited. They focused on air defense. It was an air defense centric Air Force, and that has not stood the test of operations in this time.
You think they let their air bases stay unguarded? And
I wouldn't think so. It's just that they believed in preserving the assets. Because we have, it's not come out, and this is something probably over a period of time the facts will really come out. they have had significant losses of platforms as well.
Yes, we never talk about that. I mean, what's your assessment as in these numbers that they lost of aircraft?
So I wouldn't like to get into the numbers very frankly, because I cannot, give you a quote which has got some resemblance of, what should I say, authenticity, or, which is vetted by somebody.
But they did lose aircraft.
I mean, possibly the larger in numbers than what they claim we have.
Right.
And our numbers are not as many. And like you said, the CDS himself has brought it out.
Right.
But see, everyone understands combat losses are par for the course. But at the end of the day, your Air Force has to deliver the larger interests of the nation. So I would think Pakistan Air Force especially they learned their lessons very fast.
Right.
They did that in 71. They did that in Balakot. And I'm afraid what they will do post Sindur, because the amount of enormous help they have from the Chinese, is they will fill those gaps in a much faster pace and as fast as they could possibly do. And they will now seek to build up their offensive capability in a more robust manner, because we have heard them. He will most certainly want to come and hurt the Indian Air Force and our bases. It's something which is, hardwired within them.
What are the capabilities when you see Operation Sindur, when you analyze it as a scholar and an air warrior? You've of course you've headed some of our finest institutions dedicated to air combat. Where do you see the gaps in our force levels or in our capabilities that Operation Sindur brought to the forefront, where we need to fix those, capabilities?
Sandeep, the most important thing which we don't we tend to forget about, because now this whole business of no contact wars, standoff targeting has become the flavor of the season. But at the end of the day, when you have a threat, ours is a very unique threat.
Right.
Both in Pakistan and China.
And the western borders and the northern borders.
And look at the amount of borders. Look at the amount of depth and mass of, we are facing across each other. And unlike the West, which air power operations are essentially against, there's hardly any adversarial air force, in the sense that there are no serious opposition at all, either nil or very limited in all these conflicts over the last 10 years.
Sure.
Not true in our case. We have two air forces, strong air forces. Pakistan is a near-peer air force, and it's rapidly becoming a peer air force because our numbers reducing.
Yes.
And the Chinese Air Force are qualitatively building up their Air Force to a level which the US Chief of Staff, I think Mark Walsh, 2020 or 19, he made the statement that by 2030, the PLA will be larger than the USAF.
Right.
So the larger point which I'm trying to make is that our combat mass, deterrence is all about offensive capability.
Right.
That is what worries the adversary. That so we have done that this time, and it was beautifully done, wonderfully escalated, and just enough to show that look, this is what we can do. There's more following, but how much will follow is what is capacity. That's why I talk about strategic capacity. And that is something we really need to concentrate on.
So combat mass is something that I was going to ask you next. 7 years from now, the Indian Air Force is going to turn 100 years. It's your centenary celebrations, 2032. Next month, you're going to retire the last two MiG-21 squadrons. And we believe this will be the smallest Indian Air Force in fighter squadron numbers since the 1962 war with China.
Absolutely.
How worried are you as an air warrior when you look at these numbers?
It's just not me. I think the entire Air Force, especially, and I think today, even the nation has been worried, because this has been staring us in the face for almost almost 2 decades.
So how did we get here? How did we get to a tiny Air Force? 29 squadrons. Can you fight a 2-front war, even a 1-front war with 29 squadrons?
We have woken up to Atmanirbharta very late in life, frankly.
In the last decade or so?
Not enough. We should have been doing this right from the beginning at some point, because we got so used to buying platforms from outside because it was more convenient. And so that had its own downside. So your industrial base and capacity stagnated. It became a little archaic. It became a white elephant in its own way. You had this huge structure, but qualitatively, what was it producing? You look at China today, It can produce possibly about 100 J-10s in a year. And look,
100 J-10s in a year.
That is what I've read
Their
somewhere.
capacity.
Their capacity. And that is just one platform.
Right.
See, it's not just one basket for them. They have several
fighter
programs
running.
and running concurrently. Ours, just about, we were struggling with producing 8. So unless and until you have a fill rate,
right,
factored in right from the beginning, because see, obsolescence will come in. Yeah. Technology has its life limits.
Right.
So unless you plan and think that, okay, this is my platform, at some point I'm going to need to upgrade this, and I factor that into your costs and benefits and all that. And at some point this is going to run out of its life, by which time I should have started building on the next one, so that by the time this goes out, the next one comes in smoothly. It's a smooth changeover.
So none of this has happened in the last.
It's not. Where is our look at what has happened to the Tejas program. We've been struggling with it. It's only after a lot of push from the Air Force that they have reached a level of certain expertise, and that fact that we have taken them on. But it is still not the Tejas which we really wanted.
Right.
So that's some way off. So my point is, these things take a long time. So I keep saying Atmanirbhar Bharat, from my perspective, is a long-term strategy. It's something you need to plan out. So this gap which has come in, and now we have reached, we have painted ourselves into the corner, where I would think that over the next few years, we must most certainly concentrate on building our own, indigenous capacity. Right. But what do you do for the interim?
So that's a good point you made there. The fact that Atmanirbhar Bharat cannot deliver in the short term because it's a slow-moving program.
Especially in aviation, military aviation.
Yes, military aviation. It's a completely different ball game there. You have the fighter engine, which I'm going to ask you about as well. What do you think we should do in the short term? By short term, I mean about 2 to 5 years. The medium term, which is 5 years plus, and then of course the long term. Long term, I guess we are talking of the AMCA and all of these programs which will deliver 10 years hence. But what do you do in the short term to arrest this decline in the Air Force's numbers?
So this is something I've been saying for some time, that we have to get real with it. You have to balance your strategy. You can't just put all your eggs in the Atmanirbhar Bharat basket,
right? And
say no, I'm not going to buy anything from outside.
It is inevitable, you think, imports.
You don't have a choice really,
right?
Because the kind of niche technologies are still not going to be available to you till you build your capacity on them. So it's going to take time. So what do you do in the interim period? Do you want to let your deterrence weaken? I don't think that's a good idea. So you don't have a choice. And Sandeep, this is something I keep saying. The Indian Air Force has always been a victim of, not a victim, I'll say, it pretty much happens everywhere possibly, but of political geopolitics.
Right.
Who do you align with? So you may want a platform or a capability, but what you get is not what. Finally, it's about, at that point in time, the government in power, the kind of geopolitical situation and scenario of that point in time. Those are the drivers which forced us to make certain choices of platforms in the past.
Right.
So that is something we tend to forget. It's not that today, you have platforms, and I keep joking about it, like all stacked up beautifully in a big bazaar, and you go with a trolley and say, give me a dozen of these and a dozen of those.
But the solution you're suggesting is that we will end up going into some big bazaar.
That also has its limits, because every international aviation company have their own order lines. So you have to queue in with them. So unless it's a strategic partnership, something. So that is what we need to look at.
So a strategic partnership with the Russian Federation, the United States, what would you be looking at?
This is one aspect I really sort of desist from getting into it, because, people tend to look at it, this is biased to it, this is biased to that. No, I said we don't have a choice.
Right.
You have to go with a gap filler at this point in time.
What is a gap filler? How many squadrons are you talking about?
I would say, I think at the least you will need about 4 squadrons.
4 squadrons?
At least.
Right.
I mean, this is just a ballpark back of the figure envelope. At least that will stem, because that itself will take time to come in.
Right.
That
5
itself,
years?
5-6 years at least.
5 to 6 years.
So that will give you some breathing space for now there'll be tremendous pressure. So unless you scale up your production capability.
Yes. The LCA.
LCA, you build a focus full bore on the AMCA, not into probably 5th generation. We have to really think seriously of leapfrogging into the 6th generation. It's not easy. Easier said than done. It sounds very easy. Oh, we should go straight into the 6th generation. But you have to start thinking like that. So you need some breathing space.
And those 4 squadrons you're saying could come from anywhere.
I mean, whatever. I am frankly, at this point in time in this, white dress, there are better thinkers who have a serious thought about it. They would have done the math on it. But we have to look at, there's a reason why we didn't go to the US. We have never had a US fighter.
So F-35 is not on the radar for you?
F-35 is a program which the US has faced enormous problems. And they all come with a caveat. You see what happened now in this case with the PA ties and with Boeing and the US. The US president, makes a decision at this point in time, and suddenly your whole, all your supply chains and everything comes to a grinding halt. There are limits to technology, access to technology. So these are who is a reliable friend? Very difficult to choose because nobody's going to part with the next technology.
Not even President Putin?
I think they're more amenable to it than what they would be in the past. But even that would have its own, limits, because that necessarily may not fit all our future choices. But there is breathing space here. France is one country, because if you look at it, we have had French fighters for the longest period of time. And without going into the geopolitics of it, there are choices, but it has to be a balance. And I keep saying at the end of the day, it's going to be a larger strategic political choice, frankly.
But then, on the one hand, you have the houses on fire. Literally, you're losing numbers, you're bleeding squadrons. And on the other, you have this thing of, like you mentioned, it's not a big bazaar purchase. These decisions take 5, 6, 7 years. So by the time the numbers come, it'll be, you're looking at the end of this decade, possibly. And then the kind of geopolitics that is at play right now, the United States, we thought was a strategic partner, but I think look at what Trump is doing. He's driven an explosive-filled, van into this edifice of the Indo-US relationship. And then you have President Putin, who's, I believe he's visiting Delhi with a long list of defense deals. So where does that really, put us?
See, at some point, we were Russia-centric in the past for our arms export. We wanted
for good reason.
For a very good reason. Frankly, because the Western technology was not available to us, especially from the West. And the only probably the nation which sort of supported us along, or were with us along the way, was France. So France and Russia were the only, and France was on a limited scale because the numbers that we wanted were always a challenge. And these are all expensive platforms. They don't come with
the Rafale is.
Rafale certainly is. But the question is, whatever we buy must, if you buy a brand new system, then you need to reset. I mean, people don't think about all these things. You need the infrastructure, wherewithal, labs, MRO facilities. They all come at a price. Even the smallest of electronic needs today an air-conditioned setup. So it's an enormous investment. So it would make sense to have a platform which you already have a certain established, facilities which have been set up, infrastructure which has been set up, rather than having to create on their own, because each company will come with their own specific standards. So we need to meet this standards of infrastructure. Otherwise, I can't guarantee you, my entire, performance capability of this platform. So it would make sense, because we have Russian platforms in the past.
It would make sense to continue the production line, maybe?
Possibly. We
have the Su-30
Su-30 will need an upgrade at some point in time. And it's already, I would think that we should have already been into this.
Why didn't we upgrade the Su-30? That's the big question everyone's doing now. We've had it for 20 years.
See,
12 squadrons.
I think this is the problem with our Indian mentality, very frankly. We swing one way from the other to the other. So when he talked about Atmanirbharta, we said, okay, forget it. Stop. So the mental block you have now is that, no, we don't want to look at anything else.
Okay. We're going to focus only on our indigenous
on indigenous production. But those have limits, and especially in military aviation, in niche technologies.
And especially when your engine is coming from abroad.
You mentioned the engines, and we had this phenomenal platform called the HF-24, the Marut, designed by Kurt Tank. It just died a natural death because of the engines, and possibly, if we had continued with that, but that would have meant a lot of military investment on a platform on development.
Right.
Indian Air Force at that point, because the threats were very real at that point. 71 war, the threat was staring in your face. We couldn't think that we had the need, or I won't say need, we didn't have the time to invest in long-term plans. We need something to fill the gaps. So we have always been filling the gaps.
So we've always been thinking tactically rather than strategically.
Short-term thinking, because you need enormous pockets in military aviation business to think long-term, to build up your own capacity.
Right.
So that is something, you cannot lay the blame. I wouldn't lay the blame on any one thing. There are so many. It's a collection of factors which has led to where we are.
Right.
It will be simplistic to lay the blame on this and that, Air Force or the government or something, some other company. No, I wouldn't like to. That's not how real world is.
Right.
So there are a lot of factors, but I would think we've had a wake up call, really, and I think the next decade is going to be very critical.
Right.
And air power and offensive air. See, at the end of the day, Sandeep, look at Sindur.
Yes.
What brought them to ask for what triggered the DGMO's call?
Right.
It's not our air defense capability. What hurt them? Because we started hitting them and it hurting them because with our offensive capability. And when they started seeing the infrastructure, and you mentioned this runway repairs, it's taken so long. So you can imagine the amount of time. It takes years and years to build a hangar with the infrastructure, labs and things like that. And you hit and damage that. It's not going to come up in a long time. So we have hurt them really hard, not to the scale. And the whole thing was that, okay, to tell them that, look, this is what we can do to you and there's more to follow. So that is what in a way, that was deterrence. But that is what brought them to the table. Because you hurt them where it hurt. Even if you take out 10%, I mean, there's a lot of talk, 20% of the PAF has been hit and hurt. I said, even if you bring down to 10%, it's a lot. And we are not really countries with deep pockets, and especially Pakistan.
Right, and not with deep pockets, and certainly not with geographical depth.
Absolutely.
As your adversaries on the other side would have realized that Pakistan is not very, very big, and there's no part of Pakistan, it seems, which can't be targeted by the Indian Air Force now.
I think that's what really worried them. So, what we were discussing earlier. Finally, it comes down to offensive capability. And offensive capability is your real deterrent. That is what adds to your deterrence.
Right.
So that is something we really need to worry about, because over the next 10 years, we really need to think this through. I'm sure there are a lot of heads down on this.
Sure. But what do you do about your adversary on the northern borders, who's not constrained by geography or geographical depth or numbers? He's got one of the fastest growing air forces, as you mentioned. It's going to be one of the largest by the end of this decade. How do you handle a threat like that?
We are in a way blessed that the Taiwan crisis is still on. I mean, in the sense that, that one China.
His attention is elsewhere.
Diversion is there.
Right.
South China Sea and Taiwan.
Right.
That I worry. I said, if that gets resolved, we are in trouble, because now the focus will shift somewhere else.
Should the Indian Air Force then work with the Taiwanese Air Force?
That's very interesting, because...
the PLAF is doing that with the PAF. They've integrated.
Most certainly. And I've been talking about the PLAF and PAF collusion for the longest, which has come through now. It's been proven now. But yes, I mean, in fact, I've been writing about it. If you look at... let's shift away from there and let's look at... South China Sea, the 9-dash line, or the Ox's tongue, as what it was traditionally called for the Chinese. They're small countries, very small navies.
Yes.
So grey hulls they're vastly outnumbered by the Chinese.
Yes.
The only reasonable asymmetric capability is which they have not got, I mean, which they can't rely, I mean, which they would, is air power. But they are small air forces.
Right.
So I'm just saying, think about it. If India interacts and trains and, on a regular basis with these air forces, it presents a certain amount of, if you add all those small countries together, it presents a certain amount of capability. So that is something we have to start thinking out of the box.
We have to start thinking out of the box. Which brings me to my question about drones. Now, we've heard a lot about drones. I mean, across, you have a full spectrum of drones now, from the tactical to the strategic level. And of course, you have talk of a rocket force that India plans to field with hypersonic conventional missiles. How would these offset your requirement for an Indian Air Force, which would be what? 40 squadrons plus, 42 squadrons, 60 squadrons even, as is being discussed?
So, you look at the PLF. PLF's offensive capability, air power offensive capability, is still limited. In Tibet, they have compensated it for it with a rocket force.
Right.
But rocket force, again, is not an easy thing. There are again a limited number of rockets you can produce. Right. And if you want them to be accurate, reduce the circular error of probability. That means, how accurate they are. Within how many meters will they fall, the rocket fall. And the more accuracy you want, more effects you want, comes at a cost.
Right.
That itself is an enormous cost. But this is something I've been talking about. I said air power is conceptually we used to earlier think air power is only about manned platforms and manned fighters. Right. Today is no longer so.
Right.
Missiles and drones have come in. But you've seen in Iran,
yes,
they don't have an air force worth talking about. Right. And see what they had no choice because of the sanctions. They couldn't rebuild the air force.
Yeah.
And they chose to focus on rockets and missiles and drones. And look where it got them. Has it produced the outcomes they wanted? No, they didn't. The Israelis managed to go and hit them So Iran,
case in point that man fighters can never be written off. And you had Elon Musk saying that the era of man fighters is over. You have drones that can do everything. And clearly, if you ask the Iranian Air Force, they'll say that, no, we wish we had man fighters.
Technology is seductive.
Right.
And most militaries, everyone wants technology. So the moment you see something new, which is different, you think this is the be all and end all of it. And I have a problem with that.
Right.
So I would like to say that, while manned fighters, manned platforms and bombers, in our case, today what has happened with the drones and missiles have come in, the range of ways and means of employing air power have expanded.
Right.
Manned fighters are no longer the sole, keeper of air power.
Right.
So problem starts because if you look at it world over, all serious militaries have fairly large air forces.
Right.
Can you suddenly just wish away those platforms? Why is it today there are nations still pursuing, who are well aware of all this technological changes, the drones and missiles, are still pursuing 6th generation platforms, 5th generation platforms. There are so many countries doing that.
Manned platforms.
Yes, they will have different kind of capabilities.
Right. Unmanned
teaming, all that will come in.
Right.
But it's like this. Today, if you're a general, if you ask, or a military commander, or someone who's in charge of war fighting, he or she, in future it could she as well, would want every capability available, the full range of weapons, manned fighters, unmanned fighters, missiles, drones. It cannot be either this or that.
Right.
And that is where I always bring the argument to that you need a balance. What the balance should be is something which will come out of our capability to produce, purchase, buy, fill, and fill it.
So you will have a high-low mix.
Obviously, you don't have a choice because at the end of the day, we talked about this combat mass. A lot of our combat mass is still conventional.
Right.
Older technology. And very interestingly, in Gulf War, one of the first space war, they called it, where the space was, used.
1991?
1990.
Right.
What the American, and this is something which is most people have not probably got into and it's not struck most minds, is that one of the lessons they took away is that never throw away your low tech, always have low tech backup.
Right.
What happens in the thick of crisis, your tech fails at that point in time.
Yeah.
Like in Iran, if you blind the Iranian air defense for that minute, all your technology has come to a grinding halt.
Right.
So do you have a fallback system? If you're thrown out of the window, you're in serious trouble.
Right.
And in our case, that conventional deterrence, a large chunk of deterrence is our conventional mass.
Right.
So there are limits of how much of high tech that we can pursue and invest. Can you wish away the entire Air Force and the Army and say, and we'll only invest in missiles and drones? Then we're thinking like the Iranians.
Right. So, you should never make that mistake.
I don't think so.
Right. But we are in 2025 and the Defense Ministry has already announced this as the year of defense reforms, where we believe is going to be the creation of theatre commands. Post Sindur, do you believe there's going to be a reassessment of how our theatre commands will be structured, given this huge impact of non-contact warfare that we have seen, or will it be just the same old thinking that will propel this? You believe there will be any change now?
I certainly think so, because see, the theatre command idea is not new.
Right.
It's been there from 1971.
Right.
The shape and form has not varied much, because see, at the end of the day, theatre command idea is in a larger way what we looked at was largely a continental construct.
Right.
But it had its limits and challenges. The larger, it's all about, they said, okay, bring all the resources available under one commander. But ours has multiple threats.
Right.
It's such a wide frontage.
Right.
Can you, hive off and give one commander these assets when that front opens up and now I don't have resources and I need to shift it?
Right.
How do you decide between two theatres? So it's not an easy thing.
Right.
So I think it started with a lot of challenges in the beginning, and a lot of things. There's a long progress which has come. And when you talk about what is it finally all about?
Right.
It's about bringing all your military capabilities, military instrument of power or use of force in the larger national interest and not one service-specific goals.
Right.
Because they all add up to the larger military strategy, national strategy.
Right. So I take it to mean that the Air Force is still not on board with multiple commands, and you would want to maintain the force as one.
It's not so much of maintaining the force as one, because see, the Air Force has no issues of, we have different commands.
Yes.
And there is a seamless interchange of assets where an air platform gets airborne, let's say, theoretically, gets airborne from Southern Air Command, Trivandrum, does a mission in the western sector, and should the north have opened up, finishes up, refuels in the air, or if it has run out of weapons, it lands in between and does a mission for the Eastern Air Command.
Right.
So the point I'm trying to make, this flexibility, you can't tie it down. Today, air assets are in a cloud. Earlier, they were base-centric.
Right.
Today, they are in a cloud. Any target, from any base to any target, this is what I know I've been talking about. That is how we need to think, and that is how Air Forces think.
Right.
The only challenge is about two issues I will bring about. And like personally, these are my views. I don't get into this debate with everybody else in the sense that, because everyone has their own views and where they come from. I said, for me, from a pure air power, someone who follows air power closely and a student of air power, I'm still, is that Air Force is inherently offensive.
Right.
But look at our strategic outlook. It is essentially defensive.
Right.
And therein lies the first, I think, challenge.
There's a mismatch, you think, in the way our
absolutely,
national
because
strategy
for the longest time we were talking about strategic targeting.
Right.
It's now come back to focus that at the end of the day, will a war outcome or a conflict outcome be decided only on the border, on the skirmish, or on a land battle? No, sir. You can only come to a point of a level of, let's say, ceasing conflict, or coming to forcing your point of view, or getting your meeting your objectives, is hitting someone deeper inside where it hurts.
And that's what you showed in Operation Sindur.
That is the point I'm trying to make.
It was not decided on the line of control or the international border. But
in this case, it was different. Right. So my argument today, I keep saying this, what is important, I think the biggest takeaway on Sindur was the ability of the three services to come together, look at this whole situation and decide, okay, who's got what capability. And in this context, see, the most important thing is context. This was just an operation. It was not really war fighting in its classical sense. So the context could be different, and the ability of the three services to come together, put their core competencies on the table and decide who's best and who should be lead and who should support here. Tomorrow there may be a situation where the army has to lead.
Right.
Air Force is in support. Tomorrow, both need to do it together. You may have a similar situation with the Navy coming in.
Right.
Or can all three need to come in? So that will vary from context to context. So my challenge is, and my thinking is that when you have a structure, which moment you typecast a structure, you're in trouble.
Right.
So the organizationally, what we need is strategic agility and flexibility to be able to do that. As long as your structures allow that seamlessly without having to look back on your shoulder, is what we should be looking for.
Right.
And I think there is a greater understanding in this everywhere, and we will find our way, I'm sure.
Strategic agility, strategic flexibility, and of course the structures to enable the use of offensive air power. And of course, you can read a lot more of Air Marshal Choudhury's writings in his book that came out in 2023. It's called Indian Air Power, Contemporary and Future Dynamics, published by Knowledge World Publishers. Of course, he's working on many other books. I wish you all the very best for all your writings, Air Marshal Choudhury. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you and to learn more about this very untapped area of Indian air studies, that is offensive air power.
Offensive air. Thank you so much, Sandeep. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure and fascinating conversation that we had. Thank you very much for it.